I'd like to begin by asking you a question, and that is, when you feel angry, what kind of game plan do you have in terms of how you're going to manage that anger? Now, let's pause right there. Notice that there are already two assumptions I'm making by asking you that question. One, I assume you have anger. There's not a person alive on the face of the earth that doesn't have some form of anger. Now, you may not have the loud, raging, abrupt kind of anger. Some of you do. But even if it's not of that nature, you can still feel frustrated or annoyed or impatient or ticked off. Those are all elements that come underneath your anger umbrella. And then a second assumption I'm making is you can actually have a plan of action with respect to the way that you're going to manage it. In other words, you have choices that are involved, and that's what I'm going to want to talk with you about. Now, I'm Dr. Les Carter. I'm a therapist, and I've done an awful lot of writing and lecturing and workshops on this topic of anger management. I've had over 60,000 counseling sessions with individuals trying to work this out in their own personal lives. And anger is kind of let's say a window to the inside of your soul. As we learn how to manage anger in a proper kind of way, then we can actually have a great deal of optimism about the healthiness of your overall relationships. Now, I do begin with the assumption that angry people are hurting people. Now, sure enough, they inflict hurt on other individuals, but they themselves are operating out of their own pain that comes with feeling rejected or misunderstood or invalidated, and we're going to talk about all of that. I'm going to be talking to you on a couple of different levels. One is we're going to talk about how anger can be broken down into different categories. For example, suppressing the anger, open aggression, and others that would go into that. And then we're going to go behind the scenes and talk about some of the ingredients that you carry on the inside of your personality that may inadvertently push the anger in a wrong direction. And we're going to see how we can make some adjustments to those internal ingredients so that you can have a sense of cleanness and goodness that you draw upon, which then will impact your anger in a much healthier kind of way. We want to make sure that anger is not going to be a perpetual characteristic that just feeds hurt and just keeps you down in that defeated kind of position and keeps others frustrated towards you. We can make some healthy adjustments there. Now, you might ask, who would benefit most from taking this course? Well, we actually can look at 3 or so different categories. One, if you're the person that has a good bit of the anger, you tend to sit on frustration, or you know that you've created a lot of havoc in your primary relationships, and you're wondering, how do I get out of this trap of the anger so that I don't have to just stay frustrated in a perpetual kind of way? We're going to have an awful lot of things that you're going to find interesting, and I hope that you're going to find stimulating to carry you in a different direction. 2, it may be that you live with someone who has a great deal of anger, and it creates an awful lot of friction and tension in those relationships, and you're caught up in it, and before you know it, you get pulled into the vortex of their anger, and you're trying to figure out, how do I keep myself from becoming so dominated by that individual that I wind up with a lot of dirty and uncomfortable emotion on the inside of me? You're going to be someone that would gain some benefit from this class. And then 3rd, it may be that you're a fellow counselor and you're trying to have a deeper sense of understanding and insight as to the people that you go alongside with, and you're trying to help them through their anger issues. It may be that you're an advisor, a life coach, someone like that, and you're trying to help people find some insights that are going to be beneficial to them. And as you talk with them, you want to be able to talk with them in an informed kind of way. This certainly can be a class that would help you in that regard. Now, I've set up the class in 13 different lectures, and if I may, I'd like to go through each one of them and just give you a very brief description of what they are so that you can get an idea of what we're going to be looking at. The first lecture is entitled, Anger, What's the Point? Now, I don't know if you've ever really slowed down long enough to think, well, exactly what am I trying to accomplish with my anger? I mean, what's at the base of it? What's healthy about my anger? What's not healthy about it? And in this particular lecture, we're going to be breaking down the function and the purpose of anger so that you can have a good idea of what you're dealing with on the inside, so that as we have a good definition of the emotion and what it says about the person experiencing the emotion, then we can take it to further levels in terms of knowing how to manage it properly. Lecture 2 is the suppression of anger. Now, one of the things that I believe is once anger shows up within your personality, you've got options with respect to what you're going to do with it. Some people choose to hold it in. They keep it to themselves. They try to pretend like they're feeling okay when in fact they're not. And we're going to be discussing what happens when you suppress the anger. And I think you can pretty easily guess that it's not a very pretty kind of a sight. We're going to see if we can get beyond that particular choice. Lecture 3 is openly aggressive anger. Now, when most people think about the emotion of anger, it's in this category that they tend to look first. The openly aggressive person is somebody that uses anger in a very bombastic way, in a very harsh way, and we're going to see if we can have enough of an understanding of what that category of anger looks like and why people go into that and where that taps into their base function that they're trying to accomplish, but also how it takes that function, that healthy purpose of anger, in a very wrong direction. The fourth lecture we're going to have is about passive aggressive anger. Sometimes people want to be aggressive in the sense that they really do want to bring harm to other individuals, but they think to themselves, I better not do it in a very loud and raucous way, and so they have all sorts of sneaky behind the scenes ways of managing their anger. We're going to examine that in this particular lecture. Lecture 5 is assertive anger. Now, many people, when they think of that word assertive, they think, well, that just means you can say whatever you want to say, and if other folks don't like it, that's just their tough luck. Well, that's not exactly assertive anger. That actually goes more towards aggressive anger. In this particular lecture, we're going to discuss what assertive anger is and is not. And we're going to recognize that assertive anger begins with the notion that you can actually have a sense of honor and respect towards the individual that you're feeling the emotion toward. And we're going to talk about how to put it in that kind of frame of reference so that the anger can actually be handled in a clean kind of way. Lecture 6 is what I refer to as releasing your anger. You have the option of suppressing, being openly aggressive, passive aggressive, or assertive. Well, sometimes even that assertive anger doesn't help, and so you're going to have a mindset that says there are times when you need to be smart enough to know when to let it go and move towards what I refer to as your higher priorities. We're going to be talking about what that means in that particular lecture. Lecture 7 is what I refer to as wasted anger. There are times when people lock into their anger and they just simply won't let it go. The way I put it is, it's like they go back to an old friend they know is not very good for them, but that's who they're familiar with, so they kind of stick around with it. And we're going to discuss why people tend to hold on to the maladaptive patterns of anger, even when they know that there are cleaner paths that they can follow. And we're going to see if you can learn how to get your mind set in such a way that you're not going to be so committed to the anger that you can't move forward in a much healthier frame of mind. Lecture 8 is bitterness. There's some people who have a long-term relationship with anger in the sense that there's just kind of a resentment that's constantly hanging beneath the surface. It may be a particular person, or it may be a particular group of individuals that they have an anger with, and when someone comes along and says, well, there are better ways to manage it than managing it as opposed to just holding on to it, they don't want to have anything to do with that. Well, we're going to be talking about what's going on inside a person when they cling to their bitterness, and we're going to see if we can figure out how to let go of that so it doesn't have quite such a grip on your personality. Lecture 9 is anger and the need for control. Many times people perpetuate their anger because they have this inner desire to be in control of people and events in such a way that they are fooling themselves. They have an illusion that somehow or another they can and should be in control, and I operate on the assumption that, well, the best way to be out of control is to keep trying to be in control, and we're going to talk about how the craving for control can latch on to the emotion of anger, and we're going to see if we can figure out how to not let that happen so that you can have a more constructive use of the emotion of anger. Lecture 10 is the insecurity that lays beneath anger. Angry individuals can sometimes come across as self-assured and very strong in their convictions, and they can come across as somebody that really knows what's what and how things ought to be, when in fact, actually, the deeper you go into anger in the maladaptive form, you're actually displaying a lack of confidence. That person's an insecure individual. It's like there's something inside of them that's hurting, and they feel like their worth has been stepped on, but their anger is kind of a way of trying to compensate for that. We're going to see if we can figure out how to make sense of that particular characteristic so that the anger can be managed more cleanly. Lecture 11 is setting aside your egotism. Many times people use anger as a way of saying, do you know how important I am? And I've got to make sure that you give homage to me. And they can be so self-centered in the way that they handle their anger that they forget, hey, wait a minute, there are other people involved in this. So in this particular lecture, we're going to be talking about how to set aside that sense of egotism so that there can be a sense of fair play in the way that you manage the anger, and it's not going to just be all about oneself. Lecture 12 is anger as a fear reaction. Do you ever think of angry people as fearful people? Many times when a person stays stuck in the anger, what they're really saying is, I'm threatened by the people and events in front of me, and I don't know what to do. Well, we're going to be talking about how to let go of that feeling of being threatened by tapping in instead to your sense of inner trust. And we're going to discuss what that looks like and how that can actually help you have a much healthier sense of anger management. And then lecture 13, I'm going to close with thoughts to guide your anger. One of the important ingredients that's going to be most necessary as you manage your anger wisely is to have a contemplative mind. And we're going to wrap up with 6 primary questions that you can ask yourself as you figure out how to handle your anger in a clean way as opposed to letting the destructive anger take over. Now, once you complete this course, I think you're going to realize that anger is an emotion that has many underlying components. And it's not just some sort of emotion that you just can't contain. It's not just an impulse that just shoots off and can't be pulled back in. Now, as we go through this course, I'm going to be encouraging 3 different kinds of ingredients. One is honesty. I want you to be honest about who you are and what's really happening on the inside of you at the moment of your anger. I want you to have insight. And that is, I want you to recognize that with an awareness of what's really happening inside, then you can have an informed way of thinking about where you really want to go when that emotion shows up. And then the third component is optimism. I want you to realize that you actually can choose to have a way of managing anger that's not only not going to harm your relationships, but you can use the emotion in a way that can actually be a component for good. Now, I've worked with an awful lot of people through the years in counseling and through workshops, and I find it a delight to be able to bring people a word of encouragement, and I hope that you're going to find that this class is going to be something that allows you to feel encouraged as you can make some of the necessary adjustments that may be a long time in coming, but that as you make them, you're going to be able to find yourself on the good end of healthy relationships. That's what I'm hoping we can accomplish, so let's get going.